Get out of my seat. Now. That was the first thing Margaret Thorne said to Andre Calloway before she even sat down, before the cabin door was closed, before anyone knew what this flight was about to become. She hadn't asked his name. She hadn't looked at his ticket. She looked at his hoodie, his sneakers, the color of his skin, and she made a decision in under 3 seconds that would end up costing her everything she had. First class on Meridian Airways Flight 47, non-stop from Charlotte to Los Angeles, was supposed to be 6 hours of quiet. Wide leather seats the color of strong coffee, the low hush of recycled air, the particular calm that comes from paying too much money to be left alone. Passengers filed in one by one, shrugging out of blazers, handing garment bags to the flight attendants, settling into the kind of silence that rich people mistake for peace. Andre Calloway was already in seat 1A. He'd boarded early, the way he always did, slipping past the gate agent with a quiet nod and folding himself into the window seat before anyone else had even reached the jet bridge. He was 34 years old, lean, tall, with the kind of stillness in his posture that made people either respect him or completely overlook him. Today it was the second one. He wore a faded gray hoodie with a small tear at the cuff, dark jeans worn soft from years of use, and sneakers that had clearly walked a few hundred miles. His headphones sat around his neck, not on his ears, because he wasn't listening to music. He was reading. A tablet balanced on his knee, spreadsheets, and legal documents scrolling under his thumb, his eyes moving fast, the way people read when they've been doing it their whole life and stopped needing to slow down for the hard parts. He'd declined the pre-departure champagne, asked for water instead. The flight attendant, a young woman named Kayla Briggs, had smiled and moved on without a second glance, because to her he was just another quiet passenger in a hoodie, and quiet passengers were the easy ones. Margaret Thorne was not quiet. You heard her before you saw her, the click of her heels against the jet bridge like a countdown, and then she was there, filling the aisle in a cream-colored coat that cost more than most people's rent, a designer bag hooked over one wrist like a weapon she hadn't drawn yet. She stopped at row 1. She looked down at her boarding pass. She looked at Andre. She looked at her boarding pass again, as if the universe owed her a different answer the second time. "This is wrong," she said, to no one, to everyone. "There's been some kind of mix-up." She snapped her fingers, actually snapped them, at Kayla, who was 3 rows back refolding a blanket. "Excuse me, you, come here." Kayla hurried over, her professional smile already a little strained. "Yes, ma'am, how can I help? There's a man in my section who clearly does not belong here." Margaret didn't lower her voice. She wanted the cabin to hear this. "Look at him. He looks like he wandered off a Greyhound bus. I want him checked, and I want him moved." Kayla's eyes flicked to Andre, who hadn't looked up yet, still absorbed in his tablet, one earbud now hanging loose against his collarbone. "Ma'am, that's seat 1A. I'll just need to see your boarding pass to confirm your seat is—" "My seat is 1C, Margaret snapped. "I paid $11,000 for this ticket. And I am not sitting 3 feet from someone who looks like he stole his way in here. Do your job. Check him." That was when Andre finally lifted his head. He looked at her, calm, unreadable, the kind of stillness that unsettles people who are used to being feared or obeyed and getting neither. "I'm in my seat," he said quietly. "You're welcome to sit in yours. Excuse me?" Margaret's voice cracked upward, outraged that the hoodie had spoken back. "Did you just address me directly? I wasn't talking to you. I was talking about you." "I heard that part," Andre said. He held up his phone, the boarding pass already glowing on the screen, his name clear above the QR code. "Calloway A, seat 1A, first class." Margaret didn't even look at it. "That's not real. People fake these things all the time now. I want him removed from this aircraft immediately." She turned back to Kayla, jabbing a finger toward Andre without looking at him. "Get your supervisor. Get security. I refuse to fly next to a man who probably can't even afford this cabin on his own." The cabin had gone quiet in that specific, uncomfortable way where 40 strangers are all pretending to look at their phones while listening to every word. A woman in row 3 had her phone half raised, not filming yet, just watching, waiting to see if this was going to become something worth recording. Kayla, 6 months into the job and utterly unprepared for this, made the mistake that would define the rest of her shift. She turned to Andre instead of Margaret. "Sir, I'm so sorry. Would you mind just showing me your boarding pass one more time, just to be safe?" Andre looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, with something closer to disappointment, the look of a man who has seen this exact scene play out more times than he can count, in more airports, more restaurants, more lobbies than he cares to remember. "You already saw it," he said. "You're not asking her for hers." "Sir, please don't make this difficult. I'm not the one making it difficult." His voice never rose. That was almost the most unsettling part. "But go ahead. Ask her for hers, too. Fair's fair." "Don't you dare," Margaret hissed at Kayla. "Don't you dare compare me to him. Call your purser. Call security. I am not moving one more inch until this man is off this plane." That was when Grant Coleman arrived. 15 years with Meridian, purser on this route for the last 4. The kind of man whose calm had been forged in 100 smaller versions of exactly this moment. He took in the scene in under 2 seconds. Margaret's flushed, furious face, Kayla frozen halfway between panic and tears, and Andre sitting perfectly still in 1A, watching all of it with the patience of a man who had already decided how this would end, just not when. "Ma'am," Grant said, stepping between Margaret and the aisle. "I'm Grant, the lead flight attendant on this flight. What seems to be the trouble?" Finally, someone with sense. Margaret straightened her coat like she'd won something. "I need this man removed from seat 1A. He's clearly not a legitimate passenger, and your junior crew member here seems terrified to do her job." Grant didn't even glance at Andre. He kept his eyes locked on Margaret. "Ma'am, that passenger is correctly ticketed for 1A. I need you to take your seat, 1C, so we can prepare for departure." "You're taking his side." Her voice climbed another octave, sharp enough that people 2 rows back in economy could probably hear it through the curtain. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who my husband is?" And there it was, the card. The one people like Margaret Thorne always believed was unbeatable. The one that had never once failed her in 39 years, of getting exactly what she wanted. "My husband," she announced, loud enough now that this was clearly no longer a private conversation. This was a performance, is Richard Thorne. Thorne Freight Solutions. We move more cargo through this country in a single quarter than your entire airline moves passengers in a year. We are your single largest corporate account. When I make a call after this flight, people lose their jobs. Starting with you." Grant's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Ma'am, this isn't about corporate accounts. This is about federal aviation regulation and a cabin that cannot be secured while you're standing in the aisle. I'm asking you, respectfully, one final time, please sit down." For a moment it looked like she might actually explode. Instead, something colder settled over her face. She pulled out her phone, thumbed it awake, and pointed the camera directly at Andre. The flash caught him mid-blink. "Say hello," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Now, let's show the world what Meridian lets into first class these days." Andre didn't flinch, didn't cover his face, didn't even look particularly bothered, which seemed to enrage her more than any protest could have. "You should stop filming me," he said evenly. "That's a privacy violation. And you're building evidence of your own behavior, not mine." "Oh, I'm terrified," she sneered, still filming. "The homeless philosopher has opinions. Ma'am." Grant's voice cut through, harder now. "If you do not take your seat in the next 10 seconds, I will radio the captain and you will be removed from this aircraft before we push back." Something in his tone finally landed. Margaret's mouth snapped shut. She looked around, really looked, for the first time, and saw a cabin full of strangers staring at her with open, undisguised contempt. A man in 2C had his own phone up now, filming her instead of Andre. She shoved her phone into her bag, grabbed the handle of her carry-on so hard her knuckles went white, and stormed the final 3 feet to seat 1C, slamming her bag into the overhead bin with enough force that the whole row rattled. "This isn't over," she muttered, dropping into her seat, refusing to look at either Grant or Andre. Not even close. She had no idea how right she was, just not in the way she meant it. The doors closed, the plane pushed back, and for the next hour, Margaret Thorne turned the call button into a weapon. Every few minutes, soft chime sounded from row 1. And Kayla, reassigned to that section against her will, because there was no one else available, had to go answer it. The ice was wrong. The blanket was scratchy, clearly not the good ones they kept for themselves. The screen was flickering. She could hear the man behind her breathing too loudly. Each complaint smaller and more absurd than the last, each one delivered with a pointed glance towards seat 1A, as if daring the cabin to notice what she was doing. Andre noticed everything. He always did. He kept his headphones on, his eyes on a spreadsheet that had nothing to do with any of this. But his attention was a searchlight, sweeping the cabin, cataloging every small cruelty Margaret aimed at a 24-year-old flight attendant who had done nothing except be the nearest available target. Then came the moment that changed the temperature of the entire flight. Grant was serving Andre's meal, setting the tray down carefully on the pull-out A table, when Margaret suddenly unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, feigning a stumble as the plane hit a patch of mild turbulence. Her arm, holding a full glass of red wine, swung out in an arc that was just a little too smooth, a little too deliberate, to be an accident. The entire glass emptied itself across Andre's chest, soaking through his hoodie, splashing onto the tablet, resting on his lap. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Margaret said, and there was no apology in her voice at all, only a thin, satisfied smile she didn't bother to hide. "I suppose I'm just so on edge, being forced to sit here." The cabin went dead silent. Even the ambient hum of the engines seemed to fade under the weight of what everyone had just watched. Andre went very still. He looked down at the wine, soaking through his sleeve, dripping onto his tablet screen. Then he looked up at her, and for the first time all flight, something flickered behind his calm. Not rage, something quieter and far more dangerous. The look of a man closing a door he had been holding open out of politeness. "David. Grant," he corrected himself softly. "Not even angry enough to get the name wrong for long. I'll need a dry blanket. That's all. Mr. Calloway, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable, Mrs. Thorne. You need to sit down immediately." Trying to help, Margaret said, reaching for napkins, reaching toward Andre's soaked chest as if to dab at it herself, playing concerned Samaritan for an audience that no longer believed a word of it. Andre caught her wrist before her hand landed on him. "Not hard, not violent, just absolute." "Don't touch me," he said, and released her instantly, like the contact itself was distasteful. "I'm fine. I just need a moment." She wanted a reaction. She wanted him to shout, to curse, to become the threat she'd already decided he was. His refusal to give her that seemed to unravel something in her more than any argument could have. "Fine," she spat, yanking her hand back like she'd been burned. "If you're going to be so dramatic about a little wine." Grant returned with towels and a fresh blanket, his hands shaking slightly with barely contained fury. "Mr. Calloway, I need you to know this will absolutely be in my incident report, and I am reassigning Kayla away from this section for the rest of the flight. She's been through enough." "Do that," Andre said, wiping down his tablet with quiet, methodical care. "And Grant, thank you. You've been the only person on this flight actually doing your job." For the next 3 hours, the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers drifted into uneasy sleep. Margaret didn't sleep. She was on her third vodka, typing furiously into her phone, composing a message to her husband that grew more venomous with every draft. Richard, you won't believe what this airline let happen. Some man off the street sitting in first class, practically threatening me, and the crew protecting him over me. This is the last straw. Pull the account. Move everything to Continental. I want someone fired by the time we land. She hit send, took a sleeping pill, and let herself drift off with the particular smugness of someone who believes they've already won. Andre didn't sleep either. He opened his laptop, connected to the plane's slow, overpriced Wi-Fi, and began typing something far more consequential than an angry text to a spouse. 2. Nathaniel Osborne, CEO, Meridian Airways. Subject: urgent. In-flight conduct incident, Flight 47, Seat 1C. Nathaniel, I'm currently on Flight 47 from Charlotte to LAX, Seat 1A. I need you to understand what has happened on this aircraft in the last 4 hours, because it goes well beyond one rude passenger. A woman in Seat 1C, Margaret Thorne, attempted to have me removed from my own paid seat, based entirely on my appearance. She filmed me without consent, verbally degraded me in front of a full cabin, and physically assaulted me by deliberately spilling a full glass of wine across my chest and equipment. The lead flight attendant, Grant Coleman, handled this correctly and professionally throughout. The junior attendant did not, and defaulted to treating me as the problem rather than the passenger being harassed. This is not a training gap, Nathaniel. This is a culture we built, and I am done tolerating it. Effective immediately, I am invoking the Operational Oversight Clause in my investment agreement. I want you, an operations lead, and airport security at Gate 71 when we land. We are rebuilding this from the ground up, starting today. A. Calloway, majority shareholder, Calloway Capital Partners. He sent it, closed the laptop, and finally let his head rest back against the seat. Because here was the truth Margaret Thorne would only learn in the worst possible way at the worst possible moment. 3 months earlier, Andre Calloway had quietly injected $480 million into Meridian Airways when the company was 6 weeks from bankruptcy. He held the largest single ownership stake in the airline. He flew coach when he wanted to observe the front line, and first class when he wanted to test the product his own money had saved. Nobody at the gate knew who he was. That was the entire point. In Los Angeles, it was just past 10 at night, and Nathaniel Osborne was still at his desk, the way he always was when a call came in from a number he'd been told to answer at any hour, day or night. He read the email twice. His stomach dropped both times. He was dialing his operations director before he'd even stood up from his chair. I need you at LAX in the next hour. Full suit, best behavior, and I need everything we have on a passenger named Margaret Thorne. Social media, employment, everything. Now, back on the aircraft, a message reached Grant's crew tablet directly from the flight deck, flagged urgent and confidential. Purser eyes only. Just received direct communication from CEO Osborne. Passenger in Seat 1A, Andre Calloway, is Meridian's majority shareholder. Repeat, primary investor and controlling stakeholder. He has filed a formal misconduct report regarding passenger in 1C. CEO and airport security will meet the aircraft at the gate. Handle remainder of flight with full professionalism. No further contact with 1C beyond standard service. Grant read it once, then again, slower, as if rereading might change what it said. He looked through the galley curtain at Margaret Thorne, asleep in 1C, with a faint, satisfied smile still on her lips, utterly unaware that she had just detonated her entire life somewhere over Arizona. Then he looked at Andre, wide awake in 1A, wine-stained hoodie folded neatly beside him. The man she'd tried to have thrown off the plane. The man who, from 38,000 feet, had just quietly taken hold of the company that employed everyone on this aircraft. Grant knelt beside Andre's seat. Mr. Calloway, I've just been informed who you are. I want to apologize personally for what happened tonight. You did your job, Grant, Andre said. You were the only one who did. Don't apologize for that. I should have done more. I should have issued her a final notice the moment she filmed you. You will next time. That's the whole point of what happens after we land. Andre studied him for a moment. I want you in the room tomorrow, along with Kayla and the captain. Grant's eyes widened. Sir, I'm cabin crew. I don't belong in a boardroom. You're exactly who belongs in that room, Andre said. More than most people who'll be sitting in it. As the sun came up over the Mojave and the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, the cabin crew moved with a new, careful precision, giving Margaret Thorne's row a wide, deliberate berth. Andre had changed into a spare shirt from his carry-on, the wine-soaked hoodie folded away, and he looked exactly as unremarkable as he had 8 hours earlier. That was, as always, exactly the point. Margaret woke as the wheels touched down, stretching, checking her makeup in a small mirror, already composing the scathing review she planned to post the moment she had signal. She'd survived the indignity. She had her video. Her husband was going to burn this airline down to the foundation, and she intended to enjoy every second of it. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. Says please remain seated until the cabin door is opened. We have a special arrival procedure this morning. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Margaret rolled her eyes. Probably finally arresting him, she muttered, loud enough for the row behind her to hear, nodding toward Andre without looking at him. About time, the door opened. Standing in the jet bridge were not the usual gate agents. 3 men in dark, precisely tailored suits, and behind them, 2 airport security officers. At the front was Nathaniel Osborne, and his face was not the face of a man about to defend his airline. It was the face of a man about to burn part of it down on purpose. He walked past Margaret without a glance, straight to seat 1A, and extended his hand. Mr. Calloway, welcome to Los Angeles. I received your email. I am mortified, and I owe you an apology. This airline's going to spend the next year earning. Nathaniel? Andre said, shaking his hand. You made good time. Your boardroom's ready whenever you are, sir. The color drained out of Margaret Thorne's face in real time, a slow, sickening bleach from red fury to bloodless white. Mr. Calloway, she said, the name catching strangely in her throat, like it belonged to someone else, someone who couldn't possibly be the man in the wine-stained hoodie from 12 hours ago. Boardroom? I don't understand. Nathaniel turned to her, and whatever warmth had been in his voice for Andre vanished entirely. Mrs. Thorne. My name is Nathaniel Osborne. I'm the chief executive of Meridian Airways. He let that sit for a moment, watching her flinch. The man you spent this entire flight harassing, filming without consent, and physically assaulting with a glass of wine is Mr. Andre Calloway. Mr. Calloway is the majority shareholder of this airline. He does not simply fly with us, Mrs. Thorne. He owns us. The silence that followed had weight. You could feel it pressing down on the whole cabin. That's not possible, Margaret whispered. Look at him. He was wearing he didn't even. We reviewed the footage you posted yourself. Nathaniel continued, his voice climbing steadily, no longer bothering to keep it private. We have written statements from the crew and from 4 other passengers. We have you, on camera, demanding a man be removed from his own paid seat because of how he looked. And we have you assaulting him with a full glass of wine, which several witnesses confirm was no accident. My husband, Margaret said, her voice rising into the shrill register that had worked on every service worker she'd ever encountered in her life, is Richard Thorne. Thorne Freight Solutions. We are your largest account. You cannot speak to me this way. We will pull every contract we have with this airline by tomorrow morning. It was Andre who answered, and his voice, quiet as always, cut through her threat like it weighed nothing at all. He held up his tablet. The same one that had been soaked in wine hours earlier, the screen still faintly streaked. "Your husband's account," he said. "I know it well." Richard's been negotiating a $320 million exclusive logistics partnership with this airline for the last 4 months. A deal that, based on his last quarterly filing, his company badly needs. I was flying to Los Angeles specifically to review the final terms before signing. Margaret's whole body went rigid. "There's a clause in that agreement," Andre continued, "about shared values, professionalism, basic respect for the people a partnership touches. For the last 8 hours, Mrs. Thorne, you've given me a very thorough demonstration of what your household actually values." He looked at Nathaniel. "The Thorne deal is dead. Send their legal team the incident report, the footage, and an invoice for the equipment she damaged." "No," Margaret said, and it came out as something closer to a sob than a word. "No, you can't. Richard needs that deal. It's everything, please. I didn't know who you were, if I had known." "That's the entire problem," Andre said, standing, pulling his bag down from the overhead bin with quiet, unhurried movements. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them like a person." Nathaniel turned back to her, his voice returning to its cold, formal register. "Mrs. Thorne, due to your conduct on this flight, Meridian Airways is banning you from all future travel with this airline, effective immediately. These officers will escort you to a private room, where you'll be interviewed regarding the assault. The footage you posted yourself will be part of that record." "Banned?" The word came out of her like it had physically hurt to say. She didn't move. Couldn't. She sat frozen in one sane sea while the rest of first class filed past her, each passenger giving her the same wide, disgusted berth the crew had given her hours earlier. The man from 2C, the one who'd filmed her filming Andro, paused beside her seat just long enough to say, "Hope it was worth it," before walking on. The video from 2C went up that same afternoon. By evening, it had 4 million views. By the next morning, 60. The caption did all the work the story needed. She tried to get him kicked out of first class. He owned the airline. Margaret Thorne's face, twisted, furious, mid-sneer, became the thumbnail on every reaction video, every late-night segment that picked the story up in the days that followed. For Richard Thorne, the fallout arrived with brutal, mechanical speed. Thorne Freight Solutions had built 2 decades of reputation on being quiet, reliable, and drama-free. There was nothing quiet about this. The morning Meridian confirmed the $320 million partnership was dead. Thorne's stock dropped 19% before lunch. By the end of the week, it had shed nearly half its value. His board called an emergency session. 2 major partners quietly withdrew from ongoing negotiations, citing what one email, later leaked, called reputational exposure we can't absorb right now. Richard released a statement calling his wife's behavior appalling and entirely her own, a sentence that satisfied absolutely no one and saved nothing. The social death came slower, and in some ways, it was worse. The country club that had hosted the Thornes' anniversary party for 11 straight years suddenly discovered a scheduling conflict every time Margaret tried to book anything. The charity board she'd chaired for 6 years voted, quietly and unanimously, to accept her resignation before she'd offered one. She tried to get a table at the restaurant where she'd had a standing Friday reservation for 5 years, and the host, a man who used to greet her by name and pour her wine before she asked, "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thorne. We don't have anything available," and wouldn't meet her eyes while he said it. The final blow came by courier, a thick cream envelope she almost didn't open because her hands had started shaking every time mail arrived. Divorce papers. Richard cited, in language his lawyers had clearly sharpened for maximum distance, catastrophic and irreparable damage to his professional reputation directly caused by her public conduct. He wasn't just leaving her. He was making sure the entire business world understood He blamed her for everything, on the record, in writing. She was alone in a house too big for one person, banned from an airline, erased from a social calendar that used to run 6 weeks deep, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, completely, terrifyingly unimportant. It took her nearly 2 months to write the letter. She rewrote it 11 times. When it finally arrived at Meridian's headquarters, addressed directly to Andre Calloway, it wasn't an excuse. That was the part that surprised Nathaniel Osborne. Enough that he personally walked it into Andre's office, instead of routing it through legal. "Mr. Calloway, I've spent 2 months trying to find a way to explain what I did on that flight, and I can't, because there isn't one. I didn't see a person that morning. I saw a hoodie and I made a decision before I ever looked at your face, and I have relived that decision every single day since, long before I knew who you were, and that part matters to me more than I expected it to. I'm not asking you to undo anything. I'm not asking for the deal back, or the ban lifted, or anything at all, really. I just needed you to know that I understand, now, in a way I clearly didn't then, exactly what I did to you and to that young flight attendant who was just trying to do her job. I was cruel because I never once imagined it would cost me anything. I know now that it should have cost me something, regardless of whether it did. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix a single thing." Margaret Thorne Andre read it twice, folded it, and set it in a drawer. He didn't reply. Some things don't need an answer to be heard. Meridian Airways, in the months that followed, became something close to unrecognizable. Andre wasn't interested in a purge. He was interested in fixing what had let this happen in the first place. The initiative he launched, internally, everyone just called it the Dignity Protocol, put Grant Coleman at the head of it. Newly promoted to Director of In-Flight Standards, his old uniform traded for a suit he still wore like he wasn't quite used to it yet. For years, Grant told the first class of new hires, standing in front of a training room that hadn't existed 6 months earlier, "We trained people to manage high-value customers." What that actually meant was, we trained you to appease whoever was loudest. We trained you to trust the suit over the hoodie. He clicked to the next slide, a photograph of a faded gray hoodie. "This is your passenger. This is also, as it turns out, your CEO's boss. Treat every person who boards this aircraft with the same respect you'd show the second one, because you will never know, until it's far too late, which one you're looking at. And it shouldn't matter which one you're looking at anyway." Beside him stood Kayla Briggs, no longer trembling, no longer the 24-year-old who'd frozen in the aisle 8 months earlier. She'd asked to co-teach the class herself. "I made the wrong call," she told the room, her voice steady, in a way it hadn't been that morning over Arizona. "I looked at a man for less than 10 seconds, and I sided against him because of how he was dressed. I failed him. I failed my crew. I carry that. But I'm standing here now because this training isn't just words on a slide. It's a real shield if you use it. It gives you permission to do the right thing, even when the wrong thing is loud and expensive and standing 3 feet from you. Don't be who I was that morning. Be who this training is asking you to become." 6 months after that, Andre Calloway boarded Meridian Flight 112, Los Angeles to New York, Seat 1A, same faded hoodie, same worn sneakers, headphones resting around his neck. A young flight attendant named Priya approached his seat with an easy, genuine smile, no hesitation in it at all. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Calloway. It's an honor to have you today. I just finished my final training under Director Coleman. He's incredible." "He is," Andre said, and meant it. "Can I get you your usual water before we push back? That'd be perfect." "Thank you, Priya." She brought it, set it down without ceremony, and moved on to the next passenger with the exact same warmth. No double take, no hesitation, no calculation running behind her eyes about whether he belonged. He was simply a passenger in Seat A, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, that was the entire story. Andre put his headphones on, leaned his head back against the leather, and closed his eyes as the engines began to spool up beneath him. That's the story of how one woman's certainty that she already knew who deserved respect cost her. A marriage, a fortune, a reputation built over 20 years, and very nearly her own sense of who she was. It's easy to think a story like this ends with the villain simply getting what's coming to her. But the harder, truer ending is the one where she actually has to sit with what she did, no excuses left, nowhere else to point, and finally sees it clearly. That's not a softer ending. In some ways, it's a harder one, because the money can be replaced. The reputation, given enough time, sometimes can too. But you don't get to unknow what you learned about yourself the day the mask came off. Whizbor. If this story meant something to you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even a version of yourself on your worst day, go ahead and hit that like button so it reaches someone who needs it. Share it with anyone who could use the reminder that dignity isn't something you get to decide other people deserve. And leave a comment. Have you ever been in that cabin? And which seat were you in? I read every single one.